welcome to the first video of my new podcast. I don't know what to call my podcast yet, but when I'm editing I will probably find out. Today's podcast is about the American Revolution. The American Revolution, 1765 to 1783, was an ideological and political movement in the 13 colonies in what was then British America. The revolution culminated in the American Revolutionary War, which was launched on April 19, 1775, in the battles of Lexington and Concord. The battles of Lexington and Concord were the first major military campaign of the American Revolutionary War, resulting in an American victory and outpouring of militia support for anti-British cause. The battles were fought on April 19, 1995 in the colonial-era province of Massachusetts Bay within the towns of Lexington, Concord, Lincoln, Menotomy, present-day Arlington, and Cambridge. They marked the outbreak of armed conflicts between the Kingdom of Great Britain and patriot militias from America's 13 colonies. Leaders of the American Revolution were colonial separatist leaders who, as British subjects, initially sought incremental levels of autonomy but came to embrace the cause of full independence and the necessity of prevailing in the Revolutionary War to obtain it. The Second Continental Congress, which represented the colonies and convened in present-day Independence Hall in Philadelphia, formed the Continental Army and appointed George Washington as its commander-in-chief in June 1775, and unanimously adopted the Declaration of Independence as the following year, which inspired, formalized, and escalated the war. For most of the 8-year war, its outcome appeared uncertain, but in 1781, a decisive victory by Washington and the Continental Army in the Siege of Yorktown inspired King George III and the British to negotiate an end to the colonial rule in the colonies and acknowledge their independence, which was codified in the Treaty of Paris in 1783, leading to the establishment of the sovereign United States of America. The Siege of Yorktown, also known as the Battle of Yorktown and the Surrender at Yorktown, was the final battle of the American Revolutionary War. It was won decisively by the Continental Army, led by George Washington, with support from Marquis de Lafayette and French Army troops, led by the Comte de Rochambeau, and a French Navy force commanded by Comte de Grasse over the British Army commanded by British Lieutenant General Charles Cornwallis. The siege began on September 28, 1781, and ended on October 19, 1781, at exactly 10:30 a.m. in Yorktown, Virginia. The victory of Washington and the Continental Army at Yorktown led to the capture of both Cornwallis and the British Army, who subsequently surrendered, leading to the British to negotiate an end to the conflict. The British defeat at Yorktown led to the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which the British acknowledged the independence and sovereignty of the 13 colonies, and subsequently to the establishment of the United States as the first constitutional republic in world history, founded on the consent of the governed and the rule of law. In 1767, tensions cratered again following British Parliament's passage of the Townshend Act. In an effort to quell the Mountain Rebellion, King George III deployed British troops to Boston, where British troops killed protesters in the Boston Massacre on March 5, 1770. In 1772, anti-tax demonstrators destroyed the Royal Navy customs schooner present-day Warwick, Rhode Island. On December 16, 1773, in a seminal event in the American Revolution's escalation, Sons of Liberty activists wearing costumes of Native Americans instigated the Boston Tea Party, during which they boarded and dumped chests of tea owned by the British East India Company into Boston Harbor. London responded by closing Boston Harbor and enacted a series of punitive laws which effectively ended self-government in Massachusetts, but also served to expand and intensify the revolutionary cause. In late 1774, 12 of the 13 colonies sent delegates to the First Continental Congress, which met inside the Carpenters' Hall in Philadelphia. The province of Georgia joined in 1775. The First Continental Congress began coordinating Patriot resistance through underground networks of committees. Following the battles of Lexington and Concord, Washington and the Continental Army responded by surrounding Boston, forcing the British to withdraw by sea in March 1776, and leaving Patriots in control of every colony. In August 1775, King George III proclaimed Massachusetts to be in a state of open defiance and rebellion. In 1776, the Second Continental Congress began debating and deliberating on the Articles of Confederation, an effort to establish a self-governing rule of law in the 13 colonies. On July 2nd, they passed the Lee Resolution, affirming their support for national independence, and on July 4th, 1776, they unanimously adopted the Declaration of Independence, authored primarily by Thomas Jefferson, which embodied the political philosophies of liberalism and republicanism, rejected monarchy and aristocracy, and famously proclaimed that all men are created equal. The Revolutionary War continued for another 5 years, during which France ultimately entered the war, supporting the colonial cause of independence. On September 28, 1781, Washington, with support from Marquis de Lafayette, the French Army and French Navy, led the Continental Army's most decisive victory, capturing roughly 7,500 British troops led by British General Charles Cornwallis during the Siege of Yorktown, leading to the collapse of King George's control of Parliament and consensus in Parliament that the war should be ended on American terms. On September 3, 1783, the British signed the Treaty of Paris, granting their former colonies nearly all the territory east of the Mississippi River and south of the Great Lakes. About 60,000 Loyalists migrated to other British territories in Canada and elsewhere, but the great majority remained in the United States. With its victory in the American Revolution, the United States became the first constitutional republic in world history, founded on the consent of the governed and the rule of law.